I'm going to walk you through today one of those attacks which has happened recently. Syscomm have helped over 200 organisations to recover from ransomware attacks against their businesses. I'm going to walk you through today one of those attacks which has happened recently and show you how attackers are getting into networks these days and some of the things that you can do to prevent your infrastructure becoming the next victim of a ransomware attack. We're seeing time and time again that the firewall is misconfigured, that people have a blind faith in the configuration that is on their firewall from their MSPs, from internal IT, who are acting with the best intentions but don't necessarily know in practice how threat actors are marching through networks these days. In every case of ransomware that we have remediated, there have been issues with the configuration that we've seen on the firewalls. We've also seen problems with the way other technology solutions are being configured. The way antivirus is configured, with the way EDR, which is the modern way of handling antivirus these days, is configured. And how networks are structured at an infrastructure layer to make it too easy for what we call lateral movement, how threat actors, once they've got a foothold in the network, are able to move easily from server to server, from system to system, to make sure that their ransomware attack effective, wide-ranging and devastating, taking out production infrastructure and backup infrastructure as part of the same attack. So today I'm just going to step through one such attack that we've remediated recently and walk you through some of the attack vectors that were used in that attack. This attack is an interesting one in that this organisation actually reached out to Syscomm to perform a security audit on their network, or at least inquired about doing a security audit, hearing about what Syscomm have done in the ransomware recovery space and our experience to date. We spoke to this organisation about 18 months prior to the threat actor getting a foothold in their network. Unfortunately, at the time, priorities changed, budget wasn't found, and the audit never took place. But we know now, having also subsequently remediated this organisation, that if we'd been able to do that audit in the first place, we certainly could have helped them to tighten up the infrastructure and close down some of the loopholes that were exploited by the threat actor only some 18 months later. It was a SQL injection attack. It was against a new web server that their MSP had implemented for them. Ironically, it was a security solution that the MSP had put in place, which had a web front end that remote clients could connect into, but it fell into a grey area then. Once it was implemented by the MSP, the organisation hadn't taken it on to manage it and update it, and the MSP had walked away from it thinking that the job was done with the implementation. The solution was implemented in April this year, and then the attack happened over the summer. Between the implementation and the attack, there was a 9.8 CVE vulnerability found in the code that had been deployed by the MSP that neither the organisation nor the MSP had patched, thinking that the other was looking after it. And the threat actor was able, once a exploit was found for that vulnerability, to quite easily manipulate their way and launch a SQL injection attack against this public-facing server. Now, there were problems with the way that this server had been implemented. It was a UK-based organisation, and the endpoints connecting to it were predominantly connecting from the UK. But we were seeing attacks being launched against this server from all over the world. Again, overly permissive firewall configuration had been allowing attackers in from the countries that just simply could have been blocked out through firewall configuration. The other aspect we found, which is a bit of human error in the way that this system had been implemented, is that EDR technology was installed on the server to provide defensive measures against code being run on that server. But the MSP had put EDR into simulation mode, into standby mode through the installation. But of course, following the implementation, following the handover of the system, that they had forgotten to put it back into protection mode. And we're able then to see how threat actors with the SQL injection attack and remote code execution were able to take hold of this server and install their hacking tools on this server. We saw that remote access tooling was installed once the server had been compromised, using Screen Connect to gain a foothold in the network and desktop access. Other tools also installed alongside that as the threat actors started to gain their foothold for reconnaissance and launch their further attack. We see over the course of 48 hours from the time of initial access to the network that 48 hacking tools were deployed on this server. This, we feel, was more than one threat actor group attacking the server once a vulnerability had been found against this particular piece of software, and that was known to the hacking community, that multiple threat actors were aware of this being an attackable device and were launching their attacks on it. 48 hacking tools installed and antivirus staying absolutely silent throughout because it was in simulation mode and not in defense mode. We see that credential harvesting tools were installed to siphon out access credentials from browsers and from cached credentials on the operating system, and that the threat actor then came back to install executables then to exploit the lateral movement into the Veeam environment. So a DMZ environment was set up for this server, but it was too permissive and able to access into the network to exploit Veeam directly. And a threat actor will always try to take out the backups to make sure that their ransomware demands are as effective as they can be, because the backups are removed as part of the attack. The Veeam admin account was then used to make multiple connections to domain controllers, file servers, and SQL servers, and then scheduled tasks were created using PowerShell to run commands that would execute in the middle of the night to start to run encryption following a period of data exfiltration which followed. What was lucky in this case was that the organization was able to intercept the attack. So many threat actors, we think there are at least 2 involved in this, but possibly more, were involved in breaching this network simultaneously, treading on each other's toes, that an amateur threat actor group or individual then logged onto a domain controller, and despite having domain admin access to the domain controller, then started to install hacking tools on the domain controller, which is unnecessary and slightly unusual because access to the network has already been found at this point. And at this point, their antivirus tool was able to generate multiple alerts. This organization was lucky. They didn't have a SIEM or SOC solution in place. This infiltration to the domain controller was at 8 o'clock in the evening, and their antivirus was able to flag up enough alerts that raised suspicions amongst the IT team, and they were able to log on quickly and see a remote desktop session onto the domain controller using the Veeam admin account. And seeing that, they immediately shut down the network. So this organization was lucky, but it did highlight, as many of our ransomware recoveries do, that there are gaps in infrastructure, that the way networks are being configured is not good enough to be able to defend against threat actors and their attack vectors that they are leveraging at the moment. That we see that the network layer is overly permissive of connections being able to be made laterally through the network, that storage and back-end systems through VMware and Hyper-V are too readily accessible through the network, and that although there are detection tools in place through the firewall, through antivirus, through SIEM solutions, that actually the response to those or the interpretation of those alerts is not what we would hope it to be in the minutes and hours that are crucial during an attack. We recommend at Syscomm that organizations take a review of their architecture. This organization admittedly was a lucky escape, but the attack vectors that were used here, the overly permissive firewall rules allowing connections in from destinations that just didn't have any rightful place accessing this UK-based network. Configuration issues with firewalls, configuration issues with VLANs and inter-VLAN routing and segmentation meant that it was possible to move from a public-facing web server through to the Veeam environment and through to the Active Directory environment without network-level interception. This highlights that there are architectural gaps present that are unquantified in most networks, and threat actors are able to exploit them to move laterally through environments. And we see that always there is technology in place. Organizations have all got firewalls, have all got antivirus, have all got backups, but there are configuration issues with these services. And that when a threat actor group gets hold in the network, they will be able to move through critical pieces of the infrastructure to take out the backups and bypass antivirus technology and firewall technology through misconfiguration and overly permissive settings in those technologies. A key message that we try to help our customers with is that reactive systems will eventually not be protective systems. That you may have antivirus, you may have firewalls blocking services and access in and out of the network, but unless we are listening to the indicators of compromise, why did that device try to connect to a malicious IP address? Why did antivirus alert go off on a file server at 3 o'clock in the morning? Unless we are able to hear and filter and respond to those alerts, then the threat actors will eventually be able to find their way around the technology that we have in place. So reactive technology is not enough. We need to be proactive and listen to the telemetry that is coming out of our security solutions so that we can launch a preventative measure or a mitigation against the impending disaster of a threat actor potentially being connected and working inside the network. And the last thing that we find is that recoverability of data and the time that that takes is significantly underestimated in organizations' disaster recovery plan. That if a threat actor gets into the environment, that the backups are likely to be impacted as a part of their activity inside the network. And if there are no backups, then we are now looking for shreds of data to try and put systems back together for victim organizations. And this takes significant time and is an imperfect and incomplete process at the end of the day. And it takes weeks rather than hours or days. We're here to help organizations to try and understand that there are common attack vectors that are being used successfully by threat actors these days, but a lot of technology is already there and a lot of mechanisms are already in place in customers who have already made investments in IT security, but the way that this technology is being integrated is leaving gaps in organizations' networks. And Syscomm can help with auditing services based on our first-hand experience of these 200 plus recoveries to try and help organizations to proactively identify where these gaps are, tighten up the infrastructure, tighten up the policy around networks, and to help you make sure that you're not the next victim of a cyber attack.